Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to miamighostchronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogmen, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good? Everything's good? A couple of days ago, I released, as promised, the Mardi Gras show. I didn't do it live because, like I said, life gets in the way. What can I say? But I did release it, 2 days ago on the 13th. And as a matter of fact, the theme of it is Mardi Gras on the 13th. Because even though it wasn't Friday the 13th, there's a lot of superstition and bad luck stuff just attached to the number 13. So that was the theme of it. And we talked about some interesting stuff, some interesting stories about people. A lot of people laugh because, they consider it, like a superstition. But a lot of times you'd be surprised. Some people say, I don't believe in that. Then when it comes right down to it, they're kind of a little bit on the cautious side, just in case, kind of deal. Anyway, tune in for that. You'll find it at the video version is, all over the place. And so is the podcast version. You can go to Spreaker. You can find it there, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it was real interesting. Mardi Gras, third one. This is the third annual Mardi Gras show. And let's get on to the good part. The good part is who's the guest tonight at Stories of the Supernatural. This is the first time he's here. His name is John Olsen. He was born and raised in Cache Valley. At the age of 8, he began to realize that the home he lived in was peculiar. His parents still owned the old farmhouse built in the mid-1880s. Strange experiences such as phantom knocks, loud boots, running up or down the stairs, and missing objects became commonplace for him as he grew up. With each run-in with what he called the man in the hat, John's interest in the paranormal grew. Fueled by his own experiences with the unknown, John has spent the last 30 years interviewing and documenting firsthand accounts of those who have witnessed all kinds of strange and unusual phenomena in the Western United States. The Stranger Bridgerland series contains firsthand accounts of ghosts, monsters, hauntings, glitches in the Matrix, Sasquatch, and UFOs. And his number 8 book is going to be released now in May of this year. Help me welcome him. How are you doing today, John?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me on. This is
on the contrary, really God, you're just right up my alley. Like I say, makes all my weird little heart happy, And
yeah.
so okay, usually I ask some of my guests, when did you have experiences as a kid? But from your bio, yes, you were in the thick of it since you were little.
Yeah, I had. I mean, from like I was very little. I remember having experiences that were really kind of weird, and by the time I was 8 years old, I was finally like, okay, this is not typical. This is not normal, and so. I have an older sister and I have a younger brother, and we would talk about our experiences, and we could talk to my mom a little bit about it. My dad was adamant, don't tell anybody.
I hear that all the time. The dads are like, no. Yeah, it's your imagination, whatever, the house settling. Okay.
Exactly. And it's funny, but years later, when I started, grew up,
there they go.
then my parents
go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, you're okay. Even my parent, I found out later that even my parents were having experiences at the time,
Yeah.
and so I think the biggest thing was they didn't want us to be scared, or they
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
didn't want us talking about it outside of the home. But it got me very interested in the paranormal, and I read everything I could get my hands on, and eventually I had friends who had experiences in my house, and I had to admit, yeah,
Okay.
I live in
Yeah,
a
yeah.
haunted
The
house,
cat's out
and
of the bag here.
yeah, and so they wanted me to tell stories, when we were on double dates or we were a
Yeah.
group, or and
Sure.
so I started telling the stories, and then people started bringing me their stories, which got
Uh-huh.
me collecting, and then before long I was hunting down stories that I heard. But after my first book, which is called Stranger Bridgeland, came
Okay.
out, then I had a website, and people were able to contact me and come in, and since then it's kind of exploded, like all over. And my
Right.
last book that came out this last August, Stranger World, I have
Mhm.
stories from England and Germany and Australia and Brazil, so it's really kind
Right.
of exploded from there.
Exactly, because a lot of ordinary people, and when I mean ordinary, I'm not talking about the person that's looking for it or the sensationalism. Ordinary people sometimes have the most unusual experiences. Either one time or like yourself that they live in a place and they kind of try to ignore it, but they, they realize something's here is not right. But what?
Yeah, exactly. And I think because of that as well, I've had other experiences through my life that I was able to recognize as being paranormal, and kind of looking at it through a different lens, because it wasn't it wasn't new to me. And in fact, it's not, if something happens every once in a while, it's not shocking even now, because my
Okay.
parents still live there. And so we still have experiences when we go over and see my mom and dad, or something every once in a while. So it's definitely ongoing
So
there.
it's not even the thing, how you hear that sometimes when you have children or adolescents in a house are kinetic. So you guys are all obviously gone and they're still having experiences. So whoever it is still hanging out.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny because my kids, who spend a lot of time at grandma and grandpa's, have experiences of their own. And so
Uh-huh.
um, there's, I know there's at least more, there's at least two or three. And that,
Okay.
there's the one that's a real trickster, loves to play pranks, loves to, and especially pick on people that it knows bothers them the most, if that makes
Mhm.
sense.
Oh, yeah.
Um, my oldest son, for example, for some reason, that the ghost really loved to pick on him, like, a lot.
Mhm.
And so he's got quite a few crazy stories about being at grandma's house, and seeing some strange things, or
Did
having some
anybody ever
strange
see
things.
anything or is it only auditory?
No, I've seen a lot. There, like you mentioned the bio, there's the gentleman we called the Man in the Hat. And
Mhm.
that's a really interesting story, because the first time I ever saw him, um, I just come home from school. I was in eighth grade, I think, somewhere in there, and nobody was home. My mom was gone running errands or something, and I was the first one home. So I made myself a sandwich and went into the front room and sat down. And before I could turn the TV on, some movement caught my attention, and standing in the doorway, it's a big doorway, it's not just a doorway but like an entrance,
Mhm.
is standing this gentleman that I can see through, but I can see he's there. I couldn't see his facial features,
Okay.
but he had a white shirt, overalls, and a wide brimmed kind of hat, like a wide
Okay.
brimmed farmer's hat.
I was
Yeah.
saying like a farmer, right?
Yeah. And he walked in, and right across from me was my mom's rocking chair. And he sat in the rocking chair, and it started rocking back. He started
Oh
rocking back
boy.
and forth. And I closed my eyes, and I counted to 10, probably
Uh-huh.
really quick. And
Uh-huh.
I opened my eyes, and he's gone, but the chair's still rocking. So I
Oh.
jumped up and I ran to the front porch, and waited for somebody to get home before I went back in
Uh-huh.
the house. But that was the first time I remember seeing him. And you know other people in the house have seen him as well.
Okay.
So there's full body apparition, which is, like, is kind of really rare, but very
Yeah,
cool when you
yes,
get to see
I know,
that.
that's why I asked,
Yeah.
and it's really funny because it's not that he's even though you describe him as a hat man, because, you hear people saying hat man as in a dark shadow,
Right.
but his hat was because he's a farmer.
Yeah.
It's not he's a
Yep.
hat man, that's just the guy that was there that's what you
Mhm.
would wear.
Right. And what's very interesting about that is finally, many years later, we figured out who it was
Oh,
because
you did, good.
my grandparents lived just down the street from us, and this small town that I grew up in, my ancestors were some of the first ones to settle the valley, come in,
Okay, okay,
and the house was originally built by well, it was originally owned by the railroad and then sold to farmers, and then there was a family that owned it. But then in the 1920s, I had a great great uncle that owned the house. Well, when my grandma passed away, my grandpa had already passed away, my grandma passed away, and we were cleaning out their house. I came across this really old photo book, and I'm just kind of flipping through it, and all of a sudden there's this picture of my house from the
okay.
1920s, and a guy standing in the front yard with a white shirt, overalls, and a wide brim hat, tall skinny guy. And it was that the guy in the man in the hat, and I about fell over. But then
Wow,
after a little research, I found out that it was my great great uncle. So it is a family member
okay.
that is the
Interesting. Isn't
ghost.
that incredible how you figure out all these years later
Yeah.
that that's who the guy is? Sometimes people never get that moment. They just see the apparition and they kind of think maybe it's the old owner, but
Yeah.
they're never really sure. That's incredible.
Yeah, it
And
was cool.
was he living there a long time? Do you think that's why he's hanging out still, or
Yes,
what?
from what I understand, he lived there a long time and passed away there in the house.
Okay.
And they back then they had large families, and
Mm-hmm.
so my grandpa was the last of 15 kids
Oh my
that,
God.
and
Okay.
and they all grew up to have kids too. So it wasn't one of those
Wow,
where
I
you
can
have a
imagine.
bunch and
Family
some pass
reunions must be
away.
like sometimes I have 3 kids and sometimes I call them my kids are grown up, but I call them by names, like
Yeah.
I can imagine the confusion. No, I mean, eventually I'll get to your name,
I know exactly. I have 3 kids. I got 2 sons and
Right.
a daughter, and
Yeah, me
I
too.
mix up the boys all the time. I'll
Yeah,
call one way,
I'll be
and
talking to one and then the other one will call and I'll be like, he's like, no, mom, I'm sorry. I was talking to your brother a little bit. I kind of like do like this. And it's like, don't worry. I know who you are. So don't
yeah,
worry about it.
yeah,
But yeah, yeah. And this is something that I mentioned to people because, sometimes people, you hear these things, oh, this person died in the house. I go, once upon a time, people have babies at home and people died at home.
oh yeah,
Okay, this was the norm. Even when you were sick, or you had some type of disease, it's not like now, that they warehouse people. Back then, people would basically stay home. And then of course people were not as transient. Like you said, families would stay in their homes for 20, 30, 40. The house would pass on to the next generation. That was what you would normally see. And people nowadays, because I think society is so transient, and then you'll hear stories, oh, because so and so died in that house. And I go, how old is the house? I go, that's was a normal thing. And I'm sure you've heard of people at the wakes, and even though, depending if it was kind of rural, they would have the wakes downstairs maybe in the first floor of the house
yeah,
because maybe the funeral home was too far away, or it's not morbid now with our sensibilities, but back then that's just the way it was. you
yeah,
know.
exactly. And oddly enough, you mentioned that because my grandpa that I talked about,
Uh huh.
that he was the youngest of 15, and so as he grew up, his mother was getting elderly, and when he got married, him and his wife came in and took care of the house and
Okay.
my great grandma. But
Uh
then when
huh.
she passed on, they stayed in the house. So my grandpa actually passed away in the exact same room he was born in.
There you go. That's
Yeah,
what I'm talking about. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. This was the more the norm than the exception when it came to lifestyle. All right. And even if it wasn't that rural, even urban places, people would stay in their houses and they renovated, but or you hear, we have the grandparents on the first floor, and the sons and daughters and the grandchildren will give them a room upstairs somewhere. That kind of deal.
Yep. And that's the same with my parents' house where all
Yes.
this happened. It's basically been in the family since the 20s. So
Yes, but I think that's fascinating that you actually got. And how about, you said that there was a couple of others? You think that, are they the unknowns? Are they the mystery
yeah,
ghosts?
they're the ones that I'm not quite sure of. And and I don't know if it's the man in the hat, my great uncle or something that plays
Mm-hmm.
the pranks, or if it's somebody
Right.
else.
It could be.
Um, and I do believe that there is like residual stuff, but then there's also interactive and also moving things like quite a bit, and
Yeah.
footsteps and slamming
Do you have
doors.
any smells, any odors? And the reason why I ask, I've heard of people, especially if the house has been around, like there's certain odors, like either bread baking, or certain things like
So
that. Do you have?
I'm not sure if there's anybody that died in the house that does, but I do have a really cool story about
Yes.
odors. So
Yes.
um in my family, nobody in my family ever drank coffee except
Mm-hmm.
for my grandpa, who my mom's dad, and he and my grandma lived in Denmark. My mother's from Denmark.
Mm-hmm.
And so my grandma came every summer to visit, and my grandpa came every other summer with her to visit.
Okay.
And you always knew grandpa was in the house because you could smell the coffee. He had just black straight
Oh,
coffee,
all right.
and um but after he passed away, um and he passed away in Denmark, um
Okay.
but every once in a while you'll know grandpa's visiting, because it'll just come, that smell will come and
Isn't
just
that
hit you
interesting?
right in the face. And there's
Uh-huh.
been times, both my parents are on hospice right now, and
Okay.
they're my mother is dealing with some dementia and some stuff,
Yeah.
but she will say things like that her dad came to visit, and
Okay.
even before she says that, I know, because that smell just hits me right in the
Isn't
face when
that
I walk in. So
isn't that unusual?
yeah.
Exactly. I mean, one time I had this gentleman, he had bought a very old house out in St. Louis. It was originally one of what they call that millionaire row. And
Oh yeah.
he bought it. It was, I guess, maybe about 100 years old. And he says he could time it. He says every morning you would smell bread baking, because this
Mm.
was the time, the kitchens were out in the back on the first floor, like almost like away from the house. But of course, it's not like this. When they baked bread, it was real bread. It wasn't like, so he says you can he says very early in the morning, he says, I'd be the only one, and I know I'm not baking bread. He says you would smell bread baking, and it's like a residual thing,
Yeah.
you know.
Yep.
So yeah,
And
stuff like
I've
that.
interviewed people too that have talked about certain ghosts having smells like with a certain perfume or
Yes.
something of that nature. In my Stranger World book, um,
Hmm.
I interviewed a lady who, um, when she was young, she in Brazil, she cleaned an opera house, and
Okay.
she had interactions with several ghosts, but there was one, I believe they called her the lady in red. And
Okay.
before they saw her, because every once in a while she would walk out and then walk back, but before they saw her, they always knew she was around, because there was a rose fragrance that would
Wow.
hit them
Yeah.
like really strong right before she showed up. So they knew she was coming before she showed up.
You
So
know what? This is another thing, and that thing about the perfume. I tell people, once upon a time, perfumes. It's not like now that they're kind of cheap. When you had on perfume, it was, they either had ambergris, which was like whale blubber fat, whatever. But they were. My point is, they were very long lasting. They were, all you needed was a little bit. So that thing that you hear about people smelling perfumes back in the day, if depending on when this ghost was from, perfumes did tend to linger. Like people like, it was, people dabbed it on their thing, and it was, once upon a time even on their clothes. But yeah. And that thing that you said about the opera house, and I think that's holds true for opera houses and theaters, that sometimes you find out there's so much drama behind the scenes from the performers and the things. that of course there's got to be hauntings because there was a lot of stuff going on, like, and you had the narcissistic type of that. Hey, if I don't got, if I'm not out there getting the applause, and they had rivals. They had a lot of drama that went on in these places.
Yeah, they really did, and I think you're right. I think that like movie houses or opera houses or stages,
Yes.
they have so much energy and
Yeah.
so much going on that I think it helps imprint that on
Hmm.
the background. And you have people that pour their life into those places
Yeah.
and they don't want to
Yes.
leave.
They
So,
don't. They're addicted, for lack of a better word, to the success or the applause. So they know they're only as good though as their last performance.
mhm,
So they
yeah,
always were looking over their shoulder, see if somebody was trying to, like, maybe the understudies trying to like cut in on the action kind of
yeah.
deal. But yeah, there's a lot of strong emotions tied into a lot of those places, and people forget that happens. Um, Let me ask you, this was did anything ever go on at your grandparents' house that you said was down the road, or was this just at your parents' house?
They never really said. I never heard
Okay.
anything about it. But I did. It's funny because after my grandparents passed away and we sold the house. One day I was on a walk down through there and I ran into the lady that had purchased it, and I said,
Okay.
"Oh, we were talking," and she looked, and I said, "Oh yeah, that was in my family for a long time," and she said, did anybody die in this house? And I said, yeah,
Oh,
several. And she goes, did you know any of them? And I said, yeah, my grandpa. And she goes, oh, I wonder if that's him. So something was going on with
something is
her a
going on.
few
Yeah.
years
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something
Yeah.
was going on there. So,
So
but
let me ask you, you've, like you said, you have an eighth book coming out in a couple of months. All right. Um, is that are these, because I know it's titled Stranger Utah. Are your stories usually centered around Utah, or are they just different types of subject matter?
so my first book, which was called Stranger Bridgerland, and the
Okay.
entire series is called the Stranger Bridgerland book series. So
Okay.
Bridgerland is, I chose the word Bridgerland because my first book mostly was in what is nicknamed Bridgerland, which is northern Utah, part of Wyoming, part of Idaho.
Okay.
Because if you've ever heard of the trapper named Jim Bridger. That was
Yes.
the area that he did, and so
Yes.
they kind of named it after him, kind of Bridgerland area, and
Because he was
so
going into that area way before it was settled, wasn't
mhm,
he? Just a
yep,
part of his trapping stuff. Okay. Yes.
yep, exactly, and he was the one that kind of helped, steer people where to
Hmm.
go. Later on in life, on how to get there and what to do. So they kind of named it Bridgerland. So my first book's called Stranger Bridgerland. The whole series is that. And after that, it kind of got wider and wider as I gathered stories from further away.
Okay.
And this next one, Stranger Utah, I just kind of wanted to come back to Utah with this one,
Okay.
because I live in northern Utah and I've gathered a lot of stories that were close. I'm still gathering stories from all over.
Right.
And I'll keep going as long as I keep getting
Well, you know
stories.
what? It's really funny, but sometimes people tell stories, but sometimes you run across these older stories of stuff that happened, and we sometimes kind of like get a little bit snobbish, and we think of these people from maybe 100 years ago or 80 or even longer being, oh, they're superstitious, or they saw, they didn't know what they were seeing. I was like, I don't think so. Back then, people, yeah, I'm not gonna say that. But compared to now, where everybody thinks it's a ghost, back then people usually try to figure it out. And usually
Yeah.
when they reported weird stuff, it was really weird. Like
Yeah.
really authentically weird.
Right, exactly. And yeah, so and that's the whole thing. And that's the other thing too that I've always kind of demanded in order to go in my book is I have to get
Mhm.
the story from the person it happened to.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's
So you
all
actually
first person. Yep.
okay, so you actually get to interview these people.
And
Wow.
the few exceptions is
Mhm.
if somebody who has a family member who
Okay.
like for example they can show me their journal and it has that
Sure.
story in it, because then I consider it first person if the person wrote it.
Right. Sure.
So I've had a couple of those, but yeah, I have to make sure that it's first person, um, because I mean, especially early on,
Hmm.
before, I mean, this is way back before the internet and before I had a website. I would hear a story, which was generally, oh, this happened to my
Right.
brother or my uncle, and it would take me a long time to hunt down that person.
Yes.
Um, Now it's kind of nice because
Oh
um,
no, no, it's
they come
different.
right in. Or for example, I had one not too long ago that's going to be in my new book,
Hmm.
and I got contacted from a friend of mine who said, "Oh man, my father-in-law has the coolest story. You got to
Okay.
get." And so then I was able to track down the son and then to the father and get that story. But
Sure. Sure.
so it's but
And it's really surprising. Sometimes I imagine people come up with, how can I tell you, when you actually start thinking about something that you're retelling it, you recall like certain specific stuff. Like you
right.
said, that only from that first-hand interview does it become part of the story.
Right, exactly. And it's very interesting too when I interview people, the number of people that I'm interviewing and they get very emotional, like, because it takes them right back to
Let me
that
ask you,
place
I
again.
imagine, haven't
Yeah.
have you run across sometimes, have they ever told you, you're one of the only people I've ever told this to?
Yeah, I have actually quite a bit. In fact, earlier this last fall, I was interviewing a lady, and she stopped in the middle of her story, and I was like, "Are you okay? What's the matter?" And she's like, "Do you believe me?" And I said, "Well, yeah, that's why I'm interviewing you." She broke down crying. She's like,
Yeah,
"I've told so many people this story, and everybody tells me I'm making it up or I'm imagining it."
sure.
And she was really emotional because
You know
I
what?
was
And there's a lot
listening
of
to her.
people that anticipate that.
Mhm.
And sometimes they never tell anybody because either their family's gonna go, "What?" Or if they have some type of job, they're like, "Oh, I don't wanna get," in other words,
Yeah,
and they keep it close to them, like for years. And
yeah,
sometimes people like you that interviewed, you're like about one of the few people that they could count on one hand that have actually heard the story because they're
yeah.
afraid of exactly what you described. And unfortunately, stuff like that can follow you around.
It can, yeah, exactly. Even I mean, even at times when when my first book came out, I was a little nervous because I did have friends that didn't know that I did that. And
Right.
so I
Yeah.
was a little nervous, but it's just all been positive. Like I
Yeah.
have people that are like, I've never had an experience and I'm not sure, if it's, and I'm like, that's cool. I mean, that's your
Yeah.
point of view. That's great, but yeah,
Right, it's
it's
like, no judgment here, it's just tell me the story kinda deal.
yep, exactly. That's the thing right there is, and I don't pay anybody for stories because I feel like
Mhm.
that might
Sure,
instigate
absolutely.
some stuff like that. But what I do is, I have to have people sign a release so that they don't later come back and say, "Oh no, I didn't want you to do it," or you
Mhm.
know, and but if the story I collect does go in one of the books, I send them a signed copy to say thank
That's
you.
very nice,
So
yeah, sure.
yeah, but
Absolutely.
because they're
Absolutely, they
sharing a part of themselves.
oh, of
So
course, and
yeah,
most people, like I said, sometimes people, it's like, "Ah, at least somebody heard this story." I'm not gonna
yeah,
go to the grave, whatever, and nobody
right.
will ever hear of that weird, encounter that I had. That what would you say, because obviously you've written 8 books, what are some of the best stories that you've collected that you yourself have said, "Wow."
When I started this,
Uh-huh.
the one thing that I didn't well, first of all, there was two things that I either didn't know about or I really didn't think were people were having experiences. And one was what I call glitches in the matrix,
Okay.
where they experience something that it doesn't fall under any other category, but it lends itself to something very strange. And the other one was, growing up, I never thought that there were people out there that were still experiencing what they call the Fae, or little people
Yes,
or something
absolutely.
like that.
Sure.
And
Mhm.
I honestly never thought that would even come up. But it's kind of
Yes.
blown me away how many people that I've been able to interview who've had experiences with Pugwaji or Duende or
Yes.
just little creatures like that, which is
And you
really
know what? A lot of people, I hate to say it, and I don't know what the experience of the stories that have been told to you, but people don't realize that,
that type of fae or fairy folk or whatever you call them, they kind of got a little bit of a malicious. They could be malicious. How's that?
Yeah.
Everybody thinks of Tinkerbell, and it's like you got to be careful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Well, and what's funny is, after I started getting those stories, I started doing my research,
Uh-huh.
and what blows me away about this is that
Right.
all over the world, you have different cultures who have grown up with these creatures, and they just have different names, but they
Yes.
explain the same kind of creature all over the world. And so
Yes.
to me, that speaks volumes, because at the time when it was, originally all going on, they didn't have any connection with each other,
Mm-hmm.
but they still,
Yeah, they're
you're
like,
going to,
I don't want to say they're elemental, but they're tied either to the land or the
right.
water, or the typical stuff where you hear fairy rings or
Hmm.
certain things, and like you said, there's different versions of them, but they usually, how's this? Usually with humans, from what I understand, we end up getting the short end of the stick when we deal with the fae, somehow or
Right.
other,
Yeah.
you know.
Yep, exactly. And some of it's just really strange stuff for sure. So
Have you come across, now that you were mentioning that, and some people don't realize this is not like the ghost in a house, but how some dwellings have like what they call a house spirit, where some
yeah.
people will say it's, and I don't know if you're talking about, this is some people will say, well, there's fairies, the ones that clean up for you. Well, God, I know there's a specific name for them, not
In South America, they're called
yes,
the duende.
duende, yes.
And I do. In fact, in my last book, I have a story of this gal. Um, she had grown up in a small village, or outside of a
Hmm.
small village in Mexico,
Okay.
and she was, her and her brother were really, she had other siblings, but she had a brother that was really close in age, and but they fought all the time. Her and her brother fought all the time, and
Right.
one day, they both got held after school because they were fighting,
Okay.
and they're walking home from school on the dirt road, and her brother did something mean and ran off, and so she's walking alone, and all of a sudden she gets hit from the brush area with a dirt clod, and she thought it was her brother, and so she runs in there to fight her brother, and here's this little man, like really little man, and
Hmm.
um it was a duende, and he yells at her and says that, your brother is my person, and you're being mean to my person, and he runs off, and so she runs home just really
With,
upset,
yeah.
and tells her mom, and her mom explained to her duende, and how this one has apparently taken a lot, fondness to her brother. So she had, her and her brother had, well, she made cookies for a month and set them out by their little barn with
Right, that's one of the
milk.
things that
Yeah.
people don't realize, that you leave them like little
Yeah.
food offerings and stuff,
Yep,
kinda
and a
deal.
note saying that they weren't going to fight anymore, that they would get along, and but so yeah, that was kind of a cool little
Yes,
story.
I've heard
So
of that, that they, I don't wanna say they're per se a guardian spirit of the house, but they kinda like hang out at the house, and you'll see the
yeah,
families will leave them something, and yeah, always keep them happy and things like that, and people don't realize that there is such a thing as, then of course you hear about like I wanna say more like the Irish version of the fairies that you become familiar with, and, the pot of gold, and,
right.
all those things, leprechauns, but they're all
Well,
kinda like in that same.
yeah, in that same area, and in Iceland, I believe it's Iceland. When they're building a road, if they
uh,
come to a certain patch of rocks or trees that people say are inhabited by these
yes.
creatures, they will literally build the road around it not to
I believe
disturb
that.
them. So,
I
yeah,
believe that. Yeah,
yep,
because usually people don't realize that if you do something like what you said, you say, "Forget the fae, bulldoze it," then it's a disaster waiting to happen. The road crumbles. I mean, a bunch of bad things can happen, supposedly, if you kind of destroy their habitat or what they've claimed as their own.
yeah,
So even now in modern times, they'll go, just go around it. Let's just be on the safe side,
yeah,
that kind of deal.
yep.
Yes.
Yes, definitely. So, yep.
It's there's a lot of, and like you said, there's a lot of beliefs, different countries, different parts of the world that normally don't have any connection as far as communication, especially when these things came about, that they kind of like, it's like, yeah, they might have a different name, but it's the same kind of like creature, for lack of a better word.
Right. And they'll act the same too. They have the same kind of things that they do,
Yeah.
which is fascinating. So,
Have you come across, especially, I know that these stories, you find them more in the southwestern United States, and they're like out of, and Mexico, which is that lady, the Llorona, which is the one that,
yeah.
that she, and sometimes there's even a version of her like the hitchhiker ghost, but what have you run across with that?
In one of my books, and you'll have to forgive me because I can't remember which one it is. I did interview another woman out of Mexico, and she had her and her daughter were walking home from, I believe it was church. I'm trying to remember. I don't have my notes in front of me. And this woman came out, and they lived in a small village. She didn't recognize her, and this woman tried to take the child, tried to lure first lure and then take the child away. And that's what they were saying, is that they believe that was one of the La Llorona, or however it is.
Yeah, because that's a matter of fact, they use La Llorona as to scare children, like, be good, because that's what she's supposed to do.
Yeah.
Is lure children away.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's different versions of how she came about. And once she drowned her own children and others, they would drown. But bottom line, she's used like, hey, be careful, though. Fill in the blank is going to get you, like, behave. Or if not,
And in Mexico as well, there's this really strong belief in witches as well, and there's stories about I don't have any of those from Mexico, but I did have one from a gal in Arizona, where her and her friends were out in the desert at night goofing off, and were attacked by I can't remember bruja. That's what it is. Yep.
Yes.
We're attacked by a bruja out there. And
and let me tell you something, people, they really out there, they believe in that. Like, they take that seriously, for sure.
Yep.
For sure. And let me tell you something. Sometimes it's almost, I'm not going to say it's the exact same. That's very similar. Sometimes, when you hear like of the southwestern tribes, what they call skinwalkers, which are supposed to be, people that practice the dark arts kind of deal. And like, it's like, you don't want to mess with that. And there's that belief out there with the brujeria and the brujas. Like, you take that seriously. Like, you don't want to mess with that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yes. I have a few stories too, about skinwalkers and
yes. What have you come across? Because from what I hear, most Natives Americans that have that, they don't want to talk about that.
No, they really don't. A lot of the stories that I get, there are a few that I'm lucky enough that I've been able to talk to, but sometimes it's interesting, because a lot of the stories that I've gotten, at least when it comes to the Native Americans, is from people who, I'll give you an example. There was a gentleman who contacted me, and he grew up in Canada, and his father had passed away when he was young, but his father and him had loved fly fishing. And so when he was at school, he made really good friends with this this kid that was his age, and he was the kid was from the First Nations. He was in Canada, and his family kind of adopted him in, but him and his buddy had decided they were going to drive out and go fishing on this river. And his the First Nations grandpa had told them, you can go out there, but you come back before dark. You're out of there before dark. And they're like, okay, and they kind of lied to grandpa and went camping there. And but that night, after the sun went down and they were coming back up the river from fly fishing, they were chased out by a Wendigo, which looked like basically it looked like a zombie with skin, and so in Native American lore, it's a spirit that's created when somebody goes to cannibalism or something like that.
Right. Exactly.
And
right.
it chased them out of that area. They left their camp, and when Grandpa found out, oh, he was furious, you know.
No,
Telling them
they're not faking it. They really take that seriously. Like,
oh yeah,
and they and apparently in their beliefs is that if you start talking about it, you're gonna call it to you. That's why nobody wants to talk about it.
Yep,
it's like
exactly.
You said the what word? What? Shut up, because there's like they see, like, there's also certain animals that if they see strange animals or certain animals in a certain way, that they also believe this is the skinwalker that looks like that certain type of animal.
Yeah.
You know, that something is like really off about that animal, and they're like, oh.
Yeah.
So,
exactly. Not too long ago, I interviewed somebody for my book that's coming out, and he was an archaeologist in the 70s. He was helping work on this Anasazi ruins down in southern part of Utah near the Four Corners. And one night he was the last one to leave. And as he was gathering things up, he could hear footsteps and something big coming down towards him, and he freaked out, and he ran out and he had his motorcycle there, got on it, something chased him out, and he left. The next morning, he went back with another one of the archaeologists, and they went in, and there was a huge wolf print. I mean, just enormous, that had followed him and chased him down to his motorcycle, and then he'd left. And they followed this wolf print, which was huge. And they followed it through the brush and then through this trail that it went down. And he said that it slowly turned from a giant wolf print down and morphed into a human foot, barefoot. And then walked off in. And so he was very freaked out. And I bet you
he was never the last one out of there again, right?
No, after that, they made a rule about nobody
the
can
moral
be
of
there
this
after
story
4. Yeah.
You know, what is it? You know, you hear about that missing 411. Don't ever be the first one in line or the last one. In this case, I bet he'd be like, well, time to... we have a joke. I used to work once upon a time in a big like area. There was this one lady. It was like, you knew, even if you weren't watching the clock, that it was time to leave because she could hear her jingling her keys. You know, it's that kind of person they're like, and I can imagine that guy after that experience, he probably was like, I'm out of here.
I'm out of here.
Because I never want to find out if it'll come back.
Here's a little funny story. It's not paranormal, but it goes kind of along the lines of that. When I was a teenager, I went with a scout group, and we went way into the Wind Rivers, and the Wind Rivers is actually a very paranormal place, but we did a 50-miler in there. And I grew up in the mountains. I grew up hiking, hunting, fishing, you know. And one day, me and one of the leader were going to hike up to this lake and fish. Well, one of the other kids said, "Oh, can I go?" And we're like, "Yeah, sure." And as we're walking up, we came across this huge bear track, you know. And this kid started getting nervous, and we said, "Well, you've got to go with us. We're going to go up. You can't go back alone." And he's like, "Guys, you know what's going to happen?" You know, and just jokingly, I said, "Well, the bears don't even come out till 6 o'clock. They don't eat till 6, so we're fine." And we started fishing, and he started getting more and more nervous. And finally, he starts yelling. He's like, "It's 5:45, guys. We've got to leave now."
Talk about the wrong thing to say to the nervous person in the group.
And I'm like, 5:45? What are you talking about? The bears come out at 6 o'clock.
It's like he took you at your word, man. It's like, I'm not gonna
took me dead at my word, and I just laughed. And but that was funny.
Not everybody's meant for the outdoors, John. Not everybody's meant for the outdoors.
I love that
guy. It's like, man, you let me live in the condo in the middle of the city, up on the 10th floor, that kind of deal. Yeah, there's a lot. You know what? And I've gone camping a few times, but after I read all that missing 411, it's like, do I really want to go camping? Do I really want?
Yeah,
I don't know about that.
Exactly.
You hear a lot of stories of people like. Sometimes it's not even so much what they see, it's what they hear, especially after like nightfall.
Yeah.
And they're like, you know, they you know, weird stuff happens out there in the woods.
It really does, and right along those lines. I remember in one of my first books, I published a story about this gentleman that I'd interviewed, and when he was a little kid, they'd gone camping, and they always went with like their extended family they'd go for like a week or something up in what's called Logan Canyon up here. And he had a bunch of cousins, and he had one cousin that was a couple years older than him that he really looked up to. And one day, one afternoon, the kids were like, we should play hide and seek. And he got chose to seek. So he counted and then went and found a couple of the other kids. But then all of a sudden he noticed his cousin is up further up near the trees by this ravine that went up into the mountain. And his cousin's waving, for him to follow him. And he's like, what the? So he went up to where his cousin was, and then his cousin's gone. And now his cousin's further up the trail waving him on. And every time he got to where his cousin was a minute ago, now his cousin's further up and just waving for him to follow. And before long, he's way up there, and he knows they're not supposed to be that far from camp. And so he gets really nervous and he yells, we got to go back to camp. And his cousin's still just waving him on. And finally, he just runs back to camp. And he gets there, and his cousin is sitting there having a hot dog on next to the fire. And he's like, what are you doing? Why are you trying to lead me away? And his mother was like, he's been here the whole time. He was hiding under the trailer when you went looking. He's been here the whole time. So something was trying to lead him off.
I was going to say that. That's one of the things that you hear about some of these Wendigo and weird, that they mimic or they lure you away somehow from the group.
And what's fascinating too is I almost thought that as a one-off story, but when I published that one, it was amazing how many people contacted me saying, "Oh my gosh, that happened to me," and not just in the mountains, but people, like when your kids, somebody that you look up to, usually a cousin or something like that, trying to lure them into abandoned buildings or off this or that. And so, I had one
story where this family, they move out, they were city, but they move out to the country, and this is around the time, where people, it's easier, like you could work from home kind of deal because of the internet. It's a wonderful thing. So they're all happy because they got this great house on a big piece of land. It says compared in value. So they're all happy. It says that when they going to move in, they kind of notice that it's still kind of furnished. He describes it like, man, it was like they picked up and just walked out the front door. So they asked the real estate agent, because they had been on the market, hey, what happened? Oh, don't worry about that. It was like one of those very like nothing. No, they just decided to leave. We don't know why and whatever. But they were so happy to get this place that they overlooked, like maybe we should ask a little bit. But anyway, they move in. They're all happy. And they had set up the motion detector things on the property, but they had a creek running through the place, kind of not remote, but not like, it's not like a regular residential where you got your neighbor maybe 30 feet or 40 feet. It was like space. And the first thing they started to notice, like about a month into, once they moved in, was that their motion detectors, when the light turns on, would flip on. And at the beginning, they were like an animal, which is, or whatever. And then one of the times, I think they were letting the dog out, and the dog just, and I have to laugh because I think this is what one of my dogs would do, starts barking at something and dashes off into the wood line, like they have a lawn, and then, you go into the forest, goes in there, and they're like, and he goes to get the dog. And when he's in there, he starts hearing like his wife calling him. Okay.
Yeah.
But then he says he looks and he could see like in the distance, I guess they had like one of those big picture windows. He's seeing his wife standing. I guess she got up too, in the living room.
Oh,
but
wow.
He hears her calling him from like maybe a few feet away from this thick woody area. And he says just about this time, his dog comes rushing back, like making a beeline back into the house. And he's like, he goes, I tripped, I got wet, I went through the creek. I was like, and then, later on they were like, okay, that was the first time that they started thinking, okay, maybe this is one of the reasons why the people that used to live here kind of like left, like suddenly kind of deal.
Yeah.
That was like one of those things where it's not what you see, it's just what you hear, but that's enough kind of deal.
Yeah. Yep, definitely.
And let's face it, because sometimes you hear about people hearing stuff, and I've heard from hunters and outdoorsmen, there's a lot of animals that will make weird noises, but it's very difficult to confuse your name being called.
Yeah.
To like, oh, that's an owl or the coyote or whatever.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yep. And I interviewed several people who've had similar experiences in the woods, where it will something will mimic somebody in danger or somebody calling for help. And
I've even heard of either a woman crying or a child crying or something that's like that makes people like, hey, stop, did you hear that? Like want to follow whatever it is.
Yep, exactly.
And let me tell you something, that's kind of scary when you think about it, because I think it's universal that people will pay attention to that. You kind of like leave out other noises, but you hear a child crying, for example, or somebody crying, and you're like, whoa, what is that? What is that? So yeah, that's very unusual. That's very interesting, though.
It is,
think about it. And that's very manipulative.
It is very, and what's funny too, you go into folklore along with, we were talking about the Fae. Some of that stuff is attributed to that as well, about, always not go into the woods, don't follow voices, don't, all of that stuff. So
that's cool, yes, you do hear about that. They kind of like, that's what I'm saying, that a lot of people think of the Tinkerbell version of the Fae.
Right.
But there's where they'll kind of like the quid pro quo, you get a favor, but you're gonna come out on the bad end of that deal, because usually there's more to, in other words, if they're quick to offer assistance, but that's a big but.
Yeah,
by the way.
There's always a but, and there's always a payment involved. So and it's interesting too, because there's time dilation with people in the forest where they think they're gone for a certain amount of time, but they're actually gone much longer
like
than
that
what
missing
they thought.
time kind of phenomena.
Yeah, missing time, and then also I call them jumps. I interviewed a couple of gentlemen who were driving through a canyon, and they just entered the canyon, and the next thing they remember, they're on the other side of the canyon, which is about 15 miles. And they look at each other and they can't remember anything. And they look at the clock, and as far as they can tell, like no time had passed from, like they had just jumped forward. Yeah. So it's weird things like that.
You guys in Utah, you got a lot of UFO sightings. Have you run across good stories for that? Because
I have, yeah. I've got quite a few really cool stories. I interviewed a gentleman who he was a World War II vet, and then in the 50s, when he come back, he got a job with the state where they worked on the roads during the summer, and then they snowplow it in the winter. And in this canyon not too far from me, it's called Sardine Canyon, they were working, his crew was working on the road, and when they pulled up to work on the road, they noticed on the top of this little hill is what looked like a weather balloon had crashed up there. So it was like just laying on the side of the hill, and they're thought that was weird. And then at lunchtime, he's like, I had to hike up there and see what's up with this weather balloon. And at the last minute, he's like, no, I'm not gonna hike up there, I'm at work. And that evening they packed up and were driving the trucks back, and the truck in front of him slammed on their brakes, and the guys jumped out and started pointing. And they all got out and looked, and what they thought was a weather balloon turned orange and came up off the mountain, and then glided over the top of them towards the Wellsville Mountains right there, and then shot up and disappeared. So it was not a weather balloon. It was
let me tell you something. He's like, well, I bet you one of them I told you we shouldn't have gone look over there. No.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
He's
Like,
like,
yeah,
what
that
would
is
have happened if I'd have gone up there at lunch? But
right.
yeah.
And you know what? I know there's a lot of people out there that when it comes to UFOs and extraterrestrials, they want to put the friendly slant on it. But I'm that kind of like, yeah, maybe, but I don't want to find out
Yeah.
that it might be wrong.
It's interesting. And it's funny for me because all of these years I've been collecting UFO stories and talking to people, and now finally, the last couple of years the government's kind of like saying, yeah, there's
It makes me
UFOs
wonder
and there's a
what's
little
up with
bit
that.
what's going on, and yeah, so it's kind of weird.
Just
You
so
never
many
know.
years of making everybody believe, like you said, that it's a weather balloon.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden they're having congressional hearings, and I was like, oh, what? But okay,
Yeah.
there's something here I'm missing in all of this.
Yeah.
Because I've heard that people for years that had come forward, they discredited them or they made them sound like cuckoo birds or, and,
Yep.
and I from what I understand, a lot of people like in the military and they never said anything because they knew you never talked about what you saw.
Yeah,
And
no. Nope. Then it's interesting because there has been a few people on their deathbed who are like, oh
yeah,
man, I got to get this off my chest, what I
deathbed
saw and what
confessions.
happened.
Yeah. Not confessions per se, but yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
what are they
But
going to do to me now? I mean,
yeah, yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So, but
Oh, you know what? I'm not surprised that there's people that hold out even till they're like about to die, because I'm sure some of these people that have whatever their role was, they're even thinking they might screw with my retirement and my
yeah,
pension. Who
something.
knows? All of a
I
sudden,
know.
I mean, I know that sounds like, okay, let's get a little bit paranoid, but I
Mhm.
imagine if you are one of these people has witnessed, one time I was thinking about, the Men in Black. Everybody kind of like looks at the Men in Black like that not being human, but let's go down the road of you were a human Men in Black. I
Mhm.
mean, you've seen what they can do to people that blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Do you think that person will ever say anything about what they witnessed? Because more than anything, they probably think, no, I know what they can do to somebody
Yeah.
that opens their
No,
big mouth.
yeah, I don't. I think in fact, I know there's a lot of people out there who've had experiences that just keep their mouth shut and don't say anything. And whether it's out of fear of, what
Mhm.
everybody will think, or even, Men in Black. I always wonder, I've always wondered since my first book come out, because I have UFO stories in my book. I always wonder if I'll ever get a knock on my door from one of them,
Well,
and
you
what I
know
would
what?
do. But
This is the way I look at it too. I go, let's really go down the paranoia rabbit hole. Let's say you're one of these people, not that you saw a random sighting, somebody that really had information that was like vital, or that if you decide you're going to say something, even if you're in your deathbed, that you thinking, I could put my family in danger, because what if the people think, well, did you tell any of your family about this? Did you tell your wife, your kids, even if everybody's
yeah,
an adult? So if you're telling this, how many people did you tell about, especially if it's something really important? So basically, it's almost like I'm thinking there's a lot of them that even died and said, you know what? I'm never going to give out, or anybody could suspect I pass this information on
yeah,
to any of my family, in case then they start. And I imagine that the more you're involved in that lines can get bugged, or they start watching you, that they're like, I'm not going to do that to my family, because they're going to wonder if I ever like
right.
tell them even
Mhm.
more detailed of what I saw when I was in the XYZ program, or who knows, God. But yeah,
Yeah.
you never, well, that would be can you, well, you do, oh my God, what was the name of this gentleman I was reading? That back in the 50s, he organized a group, but you do
Mhm.
hear of these ufologists, especially the early ones that did get that visit, like, hey, back off the UFO stuff. No more
Yeah.
stories, all right?
Yep. Yeah.
Enough.
Yep. Yeah. And it makes you wonder, why,
Of
what was
course.
going on with it. So
Well,
it's,
this is the thing. If you think it's like, okay, so yeah, all right, yeah, let them say whatever you feel, so whatever. Who cares?
yeah.
There's always going to be a portion of the people like, but yeah, when they quash it, it's like, why quash it?
Yeah.
And especially, well, and I want to say this, John, especially somebody that's collecting stories from everyday people. and putting them in a book. And so I look, and there's people that are reading it going, hey, that's what happened to me. Oh my God, you're kidding. Well, that place, yeah, I've been there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny.
That
Yeah. Well, and
because
it's amazing how many people do that where they're like, oh my gosh, they've
Mhm.
held on to this story because they felt like they were the only ones. And then they read it and they're like,
Yes.
somebody else has had the same experience. So,
Somebody's right. I'm not the universe didn't pick on me to subject
right.
me to witnessing whatever it was.
Yeah.
And this is what I tell people because I was a hypnotherapist, and that's a whole nother story about people that contacted me about stuff that they had seen.
Hmm.
And people don't realize that once you witness something, whether it's lights in the sky or whatever, your world shifts and you
Yeah.
can never go back to what it was before.
Nope. Exactly.
Because
And
all of
it's
a
weird.
sudden, even if you didn't get it on the video or a picture or nothing, all you saw was these, whatever the experience was, you can never go back to the way, how BCAD,
Hmm.
before the experience, BE, you can never go back there. So then you start thinking about like, well, what else is out there?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. It
That
just
is
opens your world, and it can be very scary
in
when
ways
your
that you
world
don't
gets
want
open.
it to be open
Yeah.
because you're thinking, all these stories. I gotta tell you, even if you read sometimes the best books, the most convincing, you can always, how can I tell you? You can always put that layer of disbelief, like, oh, maybe, yeah, but it's
Yeah.
just, or like the movie, but all of a sudden when you have that firsthand experience, it's like, oh God, what else in my world? Because let's face it, humans are creatures of habit.
Yeah.
What else in my belief system am I thinking? Is there no way this is possible?
Yeah, we
Actually
we
does.
really like our world right here and under
Yes.
control, and it's very scary when all of a
Hmm.
sudden not only is it a big world, but there's things out there that cannot be explained, and
Hmm.
it can really be
Yes.
scary. For me personally, I love it. It's exciting, but
Hmm.
but I can definitely see, and I definitely understand, when I interview people that they're like, because that's the one thing I will do is change their names or edit a little
Right,
bit so
right. So
nobody
that,
can find
yeah.
out.
Hmm.
Um, I'm amazed at how many people are okay with their names going in the way it is and stuff. But yeah, it just, and a lot of people go one of two ways when they have their experience. They either want to lock it away and never experience it again, or they want to know more and they try and chase down the experience and everything. So,
But you
and
know
I'm
what?
not
There's
saying,
people out there, like I'm gonna say, even let's say that setting of the woods or stuff like that. I mean, I've run across people that it's basically chased them away
yeah,
from how's this? Some that I know were hunters that they didn't have a problem going out by themselves to hunt.
yeah,
It was like, okay, especially like when you describe that, hey, they grew up hunting or doing this, they were outdoorsmen, it's even as kids, they have this one experience, and if they go back to it, they never go alone. They
no,
never go unarmed, depending on what their experience was.
yeah,
All right. And in some cases, they'll avoid that one area where they saw or had an experience. That's like, you can never drag them back. No way, no how.
yeah, yep,
Um, they're like, oh yeah, and they might not really have a solid explanation. And sometimes they don't want, but it's like, no, I never want to subject myself to possibly seeing or hearing or whatever it was that they had ever again.
yeah. And I have definitely run into those people for sure that are like, nope, it took them years, if never again, to go back into the forest, or
Yeah, yeah. Or that one stretch of whatever that area was.
yeah,
They kind of like, it's really funny because sometimes when I was saying that thing about auditory, sometimes you ask yourself, what's worse, when you see it or when you don't? Because when you don't, your imagination, like, oh my God.
yeah,
And some people have never actually seen anything, but they've heard something. And along with that, when you were describing that person that knew in an Anasazi that
oh,
something big was coming towards them,
hmm,
and it's like, I don't need to see it, but I know I need to get out of here. Like
yeah,
now.
yeah,
Yeah, like right now.
yep,
Um,
exactly,
that kind of deal. And so
yeah.
and I don't know, have you run, I know you've have you had done stories about Bigfoot, about people talking to you about Bigfoot experiences?
Yeah, I've gotten quite a few Bigfoot stories. They're kind of some of my favorites too, and that's one thing I'd love to see. I know people think I'm weird, but I'd love to have
Yeah.
that encounter. So one of the ones that kind of stands out to me, there was uh, a lady and her husband at the time. They were in the mountains on on one of these side by side vehicles going through, and it was getting to be dusk. And they come around the corner, and not too far off, they see this guy in all black, and they're like, "Well, that's kind of weird." And as they come around the corner, they kind of surprised this person, and they jumped in the tree and like just like that climbed right to the top of this pine tree.
What?
And it was at this point they realized that's not a person.
Yeah.
and they thought, well, was it a bear? And then they look and they can see it's not a bear. And so it was actually a juvenile Sasquatch, because it was only about 5 foot tall, not huge, but still kind of shaped like a Sasquatch. And it had run to the top of this pine tree and would just peek around every once in a while at them,
Oh my God.
and they're sitting there and they're just amazed, but it's getting darker and darker and they're like, I don't want to be around here later. So
When the
they drove
parents
off.
come for
But
it.
right when that happens, but and it was very unique to me because I've never heard of one climbing a tree, but it would make sense that a young one might do that, like just like a bear, kind of, cubs are, when they're
Let's
in
face
trouble they
it.
climb up.
If we
So
can manage it, that's where we go. We
Yeah.
scramble up if we're in trouble.
yeah.
It's like,
And I asked her, I was like, well, how fast was it? And she's like, it was like Spider-Man climbing a tree, like climbing a building, just straight up, automatically up, like 30 feet up this pine tree. And because of the way the limbs were and everything, they could see it peeking down through and looking at them. And but yeah.
yeah, no, you hear that some Bigfoot, some of them, you hear these stories like what you just said. They kind of like looking at you. You happen to like, because I think they're masters of camouflage personally.
Yeah.
But then you hear there are times where I think they become territorial, where you hear people getting stuff thrown at them.
Yeah. Yep. There's been a few stories like that. I interviewed a gentleman who was he was a manager of basically it was a hotel that's up in the mountains, a lodge. And one night it was in the off season, but before winter, and he only had one couple. It was the middle of the week. He had one couple staying, and because it was so far up in the mountains, as the managers would go up for 3 days, they had their own room, stay, and then come back. And they wanted, all of a sudden, this couple wanted to leave at 1:00 in the morning, and he's like, well, why? And they ho-hummed around it, and they said, well, we were on the porch and we saw an animal run across the parking lot. And he goes, well, we're in the mountains, we've got lots of animals. And they said this was huge and on 2 feet. And he's like,
that bipedal will do it for you.
Yeah,
exactly.
And so they left, and then he had an experience while he was putting away paperwork, where it banged on the building and kind of scared him pretty good. I would imagine.
I've heard of that they do that. Like, I've heard that, like, sometimes they'll throw, like, I'm not talking about little pebbles, that they hurl these big stones. And sometimes I think one of two things: either they're territorial, or maybe their mating season is like, there's other people, and those stories that you hear, sometimes they come around like either campsites or houses or whatever. I think sometimes animals get old. Sometimes they can't hunt as well. They get sick, they're coming maybe around just to like snatch what they can, or I think normally they just want to stay away from us. But hey, when you're hungry, and what I tell everybody, if you look at the usual size that people describe a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch, you need a lot of calories to sustain a body like that.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So I bet you they spend a good portion of their day eating and just to like mosting it. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised that if something happens, that's sometimes why they're drawn into contact with humans. And you hear about them even raiding on chicken houses and chicken coops and things like that.
One of the coolest stories that I heard, this was not in, I didn't get it first person. It wasn't somebody else that had gathered this story. So it's not in my books, but this gentleman in Montana, he ran a wrecker at night. He would go pick up cars that were broke down. And this lady going through the canyon had hit this great big elk and totaled her car. And the cops had called and said, "Can you come up and haul her car away?" He said, "Sure." And he got up there just as the cop was finishing with her, and the cop took her down the canyon. And so he's hooking up her car. It's the middle of the night.
Right.
And all of a sudden he hears something, and he flips around the light, and down there were this great big elk. They're enormous. They're like nearly 1,000 pounds, these animals. And there was a Sasquatch that had grabbed it by the horn and was looking at the guy, and he drug that dead elk straight up the mountain and into the trees like it was nothing.
Yeah,
And he got out of
like,
there.
It's yours.
I'm gone. Yeah.
You know what? I got a good sense what many years ago I went to Yellowstone where they have those elks and those buffaloes. Let me tell you something. That's when you get a really, really good idea how huge these things are.
Yeah.
They're huge.
They are really big.
Yeah, I was like, man, it's yours. Take that out. Be on your way. Bye.
Yep. Exactly. So
yeah, they're like they're like opportunistic, like most predators. And I know there's people are going, "Oh, don't call them predators," like Harry and the Hendersons. I'm like, nah, I'm sorry. I think that they're carnivores and they'll eat berries, but like I said, that calorie consumption, you need meat. You need those big, massive bodies. Yeah.
Yep. And I've heard of a lot of them hunting like that. But I'll tell you, because I'm in the paranormal world and I get Bigfoot stories and I get UFO stories. It's funny, but the most argumentative group are different groups of Bigfoot people who, and they will argue over things. And I'm just like, you guys, you can't actually know, because like modern science has even said it's not a real creature. We may believe it is, and we may have our feelings and seen whatever, but how do you guys have arguments about what they eat? Like, you have no idea.
What, there's the people that look at it like they're real animals, like flesh and blood, and then you have the ones that kind of think that there's something, either they're interdimensional and that's why no bodies have been found. And like, I'm not going to say they're not solid, but that there's something, they're not totally like a bear running around the woods. And there's some people that say that it's strictly that this is just some type of maybe lost primate, whatever.
Yeah.
That's managed to stay out there in the wilderness. And that's why we've never captured one or found one.
Right. Well, and this is what I tell people too, because I've had different discussions, especially with hunters that are like, especially around here. They'll say, well, they've never found a body. And I said, and I'll look at them and I'll say, do you know if there are black bear in the mountain? And they're like, yes, of course there's black bear up here. And I said, are there mountain lion? And they're like, yes. And I said, and you hunt all the time, right? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, how many bear carcasses and mountain lion carcasses have you ever seen? And they're like, none. And I'm like, and that's something that you even know is up there. Exactly. And you've never seen a dead one. Yes. And they're like, well, I guess that makes sense. And I'm like, yeah.
Right, exactly.
I mean, you see dead deer and dead elk, but there's a lot of those. You know what I mean? There's a lot of those. But once you get to the predators, like bear and mountain lion, then there's a lot less of them, and it's harder to find, dead bodies. It's harder. And
people don't realize that they get picked up. There's other animals and insects and the weather, depending.
There's not too long ago, there was a gentleman that did a study, and he wanted to know, how long it took for a deer carcass to disappear. And that was, so he took a couple different deer carcasses that were roadkill, and he put them in the mountains, and then put cameras around it to see. And this is what shocked him, and it shocked me too. But do you know what the biggest, or the animal that ate the most of the deer carcasses was?
No, what?
Other deer.
What? Really?
Other deer. Yeah, other deer would come in and eat them.
Cannibals.
I know, right? And I've seen
Yeah.
videos of deer and elk that were sitting there, and a couple times I've seen several videos, and a mother duck will walk by and they'll just reach over and pick up one of the baby ducks and eat it, like right like that.
You know what?
So
I have
if they
chickens,
will
and
do
people don't
that, who
realize
knows?
poultry
Yeah,
will cannibalize just
everything
about
will.
everything. I've seen that. I've
Yeah.
seen that in action. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
That you always think, oh, they're so fluffy, and they're what is it? No, they're not. They're not. No, they're herbivores, which
Yeah.
means they'll. Oh, no, I'm sorry, an omnivore.
Omnivore.
They'll eat
Yeah.
whatever comes their way. Hello.
Yep.
But that's
And
fascinating that the
no,
deer are
the deer
coming.
ate them. Yeah, deer come in and eat other deer.
The
It's
carcass.
strange, but and the others.
Wow.
And there was a guy that was doing a study too, because there are places where several deer would be hit on the road, and they thought, well, maybe that's a migratory area. But come to find out that they would be hit because one would get hit and then others would come out to lick the blood off the road, and then they got hit again. So
That's incredible.
I know.
Where I live at, I got to be careful because I live in a rural area, and yeah, that's one of the things you got to be careful for, is hitting a deer.
Yeah. Yep. I've hit my share here in the West. They're everywhere.
No, yeah, especially at night around here. If you go out at night, you don't see them so much in the daytime, but if you're going down these stretches of road, and they'll come up, out of the woods. Yeah, that's my biggest fear. I don't know if I don't, besides the damage, but still,
right.
I don't think about killing a deer, but that's the blood of it's like.
Isn't that funny though? That just lets you know, like, that nature is just, it is cruel, and it is not a Disney film out there in the woods. I'm telling you, people.
And everybody, you think of Deer the Bambi as like, oh, that's so sweet. It's like, yeah, if you mow them down, guess who's gonna be first there with the silverware?
Yeah, the silverware eating them. Yeah. Yep.
And I think also because, let's face it, it's a protein source, and it's got to be, because basically, I think, I don't know, I'm not an animal, but you think these animals doesn't care about the flavor. All they're thinking about is nutrition,
right?
Eating.
Yep. So exactly.
And that's watch out for the deer and the blood. The thing about that, they're licking the blood off the asphalt.
Off the asphalt. Yep.
That is.
And back when they still used salt, to up here where it's winter time and they do salt, that would happen a lot too, because they would be near the road to lick up the salt, because that's something that's hard to come by in nature. And so
that around here, obviously I'm in North Florida, there's no snow, but they sell the salt licks. Like if you go to all the hunting, they got those salt licks, and other people try to keep them close to their property, so they put the salt licks out there so that they could keep them by. But it's incredible, like exactly like what you just said, John. Nature can, and it's, what, and we look at it in our moral compass, and it's not a bad or a good thing. It's just nature. It's survival.
Yep.
It's not like, oh, those bad deers, they're eating another deer. They're just surviving.
Yeah, exactly. It's just about survival. And yeah, it is. I could get way into that as well.
Right. But everybody wants to put our spin on it, our moral compass spin. Don't get me wrong. Yes, humans should have a moral compass. But I'm saying sometimes we want to put our sensibilities on animals, and it just doesn't work, because all they thinking about is, I want to exist.
Yeah.
I want to exist till the next day, or not have young, or whatever.
Right. When you can't go to the refrigerator and get food, you're oftentimes wondering where your next meal is coming from. And
let me tell you something. We could do a whole show about that. That and I tell everybody, because I grew up in South Florida, where there was always, every once in a while, the threat of a hurricane. And I say, you want to see people wig out? When people run to the stores and they empty out the shelves, and the people that, there's always the ones that are late to the party. They get there and all these store shelves are empty, and you see them wigging out. And I'm like, folks, I hate to see it if something ever happened, because we don't know how to sustain ourselves.
No,
if we had to.
Yeah, no, I'm really lucky in that aspect, because I grew up, I worked on a farm since I was 12. And so, we canned our garden, so I
Yes.
kind of know how to do all of that stuff. And it's funny because I will forget that that's not something everybody learns how to do. I take it for granted sometimes. So,
and the people once upon a time, a lot of people knew how to do that, and they kept shrinking. And I've heard, and I don't know the exact numbers, but I've heard that farmers have aged out. Like there's no young farmers.
Nope.
Farming, and that the people that knew how to farm, the knowledge, even if you had a machine do part of the work, but the knowledge of how to do it, that I think it was like the average age of the farmers was like 60 years old.
Yeah.
Things like that.
And the farmers are passing away, and then their kids are just selling off the land.
Right. They're like, yeah, no, thanks. Oh, the family farm that's been with us for like 150 years. Sorry, but no, I'm not gonna be like, no, that's they're selling off their farmlands and the knowledge. It's the brain drain, as far as people that have the knowledge. And I tell everybody, you can read all the books you want, whatever. Nothing replaces actual experience or field work. How's that?
Yep.
As far as how to do things.
Yep.
Yeah. No. We're growing weeds. As a matter of fact, we just got some planters. I've had chickens and stuff like that, but we just put in as much, because down here in Florida, January, February is a planting season.
Oh, right.
And I just put some onions and garlic and what else? Something else.
And I'm still 4 or 5 months from being able to do that. So
right. No, I know. That's what I'm saying. In Florida, it's Monday, January, February is, planting season. But and it's like one of those things that we said, you know what? Yeah. All right. Even if we only grow enough to feed ourselves, we'll get by with that, just to see how far we can go with that.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. I tell everybody I've seen firsthand that, like you said, everybody thinks, you're always going to be able to drive to the corner store, and get whatever you want. And sometimes that's not the case.
Yep. But you just never know. So,
yeah. And all right, you guys. And I know my audience. Yes, I do have the enforcer. I call the enforcer.
The enforcer.
It's full of water.
Gotcha.
Because I have 8 dogs. And they all usually lie around they're down at the bottom of my feet right now. Yeah. And every once in a while, right now they heard I have those guineas. And those guineas, they go, they make that very unusual noise. Every once in a while, I have one that decides at 8:20 p.m. that they're going to start squawking.
Oh, gotcha.
And believe it or not, they're like alarms. So
right.
The guinea squawks. There's one here at my window, one of my dogs that goes, then everybody here is like, that's the one that I'm like, shut up,
That's
but
funny.
yeah, it's
that's funny.
That how they use like animals, especially dogs or cats, as paranormal meters,
right.
Usually things like that. And it's true, they will pick up on stuff that sometimes I'm like, I'm not talking paranormal wise, but what are you guys barking about? Sure enough, there's something out there. Either they're seeing it. I don't know how, but they pick up on stuff. But anyway, John, for my podcast listeners, what is the best way to find you? What is your website address?
So my website is strangerbridgerland.com. And there you can get a hold of me. You can find out, what's going on, like what shows I'm going to be on. And then also how to get my books. You can also go to Amazon and look up Stranger Bridgerland book series. I now officially all but one of my books are on Audible as well.
Oh, so wow, great.
Softback, hardback if you really want it, Kindle, and now Audible.
Right, so you've got the hardback, the softback, or the paperback. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Audible and Kindle.
Yep,
excellent.
So, yep. And
let me tell you something. I know I'm a reader. I've always been a reader. But it's just that the multitasking that we usually do, where like I can listen to it and then I could be like, yeah, I know what you mean.
Exactly. So, yep, exactly. And so if any of your listeners have stories they'd like to share, I'd love to hear them as well, and contact me. And,
I'm putting a link to your website on the credits of the show. So of course,
awesome.
They can contact you and follow up and share. And then I'll have them come back and tell us about his new book, another new book with a whole new set of stories.
Yeah,
And
I'd
let me
love
ask you
to
real
come
quick.
back.
Has anybody ever told you a story, John, that you said, you know what, that's just I can't write about that? Have you ever had that?
The one thing that I do kind of avoid
Uh-huh.
writing about are stories where dealing with Ouija boards or where they were looking for
Uh-huh.
trouble, just because I have
Yes.
this feeling inside that I have this personal thing where I don't like to encourage that. I've
Sure.
written a couple, but they're all from the don't do this kind of
Right.
point of
Cautionary
view.
tale kind of deal.
Yeah. But other than that, no, I will listen to any story, and my editor, who is also my lovely wife, helps me
Mm-hmm.
decide which stories go in which book.
Okay.
And so, because I still have a stack of like really old stories that I pick through
Yes.
and go, and then I'm always getting new stories. So,
Of
yep,
course. And that's the
yep,
way it works. That's
yep.
fantastic. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, John. It has been absolutely wonderful to speak to you. And I want to wish you the best of luck on your new book. And I'm sure the ones in the future, because it sounds like you said you have a bunch of stories already lined up,
Yeah, I
ready to
do.
go.
I'll keep going as long as they keep coming in. So
Absolutely. Okay.
awesome.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Wow. Oh, there we go. Okay. So what did you think? Yeah, he's got that new book. I was looking at it. Number 8, Stranger Utah. It's coming out in May. But I looked at all his sets of books. They look really interesting. Just up my alley. Because they talk about all weird stuff. So what can I say? But yeah. And I've said this before in other shows and you know what we were talking about, that some people, it's not like sometimes people live, you know, they have experiences like let's say years worth of experiences because they lived in a place, like let's say like what happened to him, he lived there, you know, you live there. But then there's other people that have this one time weird experience, right? They, even if it's a ghost story, maybe someplace they went to stay at for vacation or a friend's house, where it's like and that's all they want. It's just that one experience, and thanks, and I'm not kidding, and I've said it before, once you have that authentic experience, that you yourself in your mind, this is nobody else in the picture, you yourself, if you're being, whether you admit it to anybody later on or not, you yourself in your mind, you discount any possible probable reason as far as being, I'm going to use the word normal, because but mundane, like, yeah, I could explain it. Once you've crossed all of those off, okay, and you're left with, what is it, that if it's impossible, then what you're left with, that people's view of the world changes, because this and he was absolutely right. Some people will see or hear someone ever say something and they'll do this intentional amnesia kind of deal where I don't know what it was, but I'm just going to pretend, I'm going to blip that little portion of the experience out and I'll bury it in my subconscious somewhere. Okay. Because I don't want to go through that door, because what lies on the other side of that door is endless possibilities. And then there's other people that remember it, but they never talk about it. And they just, something shifts inside of them. Maybe like what I was saying, that people change their habits. Um, if they're hunters, some don't go hunting. People camping, I've heard of them. They're like all of a sudden camping was their favorite way to spend some time outdoors. And it's like, nope, no more camping. Or if they go with somebody, they have to go with somebody. I've heard of hunters altogether abandoning hunting. I mean, not even talking about changing. They just like, I'm not, um, because what they saw, what they experienced was so like, and, and it's not so much sometimes like people say, well, you know, you see, let's say you see an operation like what he saw. He saw this see-through kind of transparent man with an overalls and a hat, which turns out that it was a farmer, which is kind of jives with if you live on a place that most probably was on a farm. But if you listen to a story and other people have said it, yeah, it startles you, it wigs you out. Like he said, he ran outside. You kind of know that this is not really supposed to be there, but there's no threat. The people that have experiences, though, where they feel threatened, not because it attacked you, but because there's something, what can I say? People, like I said, in the woods, there's other people that have seen ghosts and they say they feel the menace coming from, those are the worst ones. Those are the ones, it's not like I'm seeing something I'm not supposed to be seeing or something I thought didn't exist. It's that the feeling I get of menace of or the extreme of I'm in danger is so overwhelming. And you know, I'm going to be on the losing end of this deal, whatever it is. Whatever it is. And they just, they, how can I say, whether it's on a, your fight or flight response, your lizard brain says, you need to get out of here. Like now, that adrenaline surge, that's an unpleasant feeling. For anybody that's ever been in a situation, I'm not talking just a paranormal situation, I'm talking any situation. We have that fight or flight, or stay, by the way, there's the stay part. Which is, when you see rabbits that they freeze. If you've ever been in one of those extreme scenarios, that's a very unpleasant feeling. It is. And you get that adrenaline rush and your body gets ready to do something. Most people, like I said, how's this? If you're going to have a fight, let's say I've never had a fight with anybody by a physical fight, but let's say if you end up having a physical fight, let's say from a man, and you do the physical cues and it ends up being in a fight, but okay, you have a fist fight, whatever. But this is somebody that it's another person. And even if you think this person is going to beat the ever living snot out of me, okay, at least it's another human being. All right. But now, can you imagine when you are faced in this fight or flight scenario with something you might be seeing or you might not be seeing, but this is beyond you. And you just don't want to find out how beyond you it is. That feeling, you never want to have that experience again, which is why you will have people that will abandon careers, hobbies, hunting, camping, houses. When I did, as a matter of fact, there was a number of my cases, and I've said it, where people sometimes their solution to things is I moved out, and when there's some type of spiritual turbulence that walks with them or somebody in their family that we call them in is because they've moved before. In other words, they've done the I'm out of here, and all of a sudden they're in this new house. And when I say new, I mean as in not age new, but whatever. And whatever was with them is them, and sometimes they even stir up if there was something at the house. But and bottom line, they can't keep running away. They're like, hey, this happened and this happened and we moved down and this happened and we kind of like moved out and we can't keep moving. We don't want to financially. We can't. Or wait a minute, this thing is, what are we going to do? Keep that, that kind of, like I said, usually I want to say there's some people that are more sensitive than others. And sometimes it has to do with a person's personality, whether they're more paranoid about stuff. But humans are really good about picking up about menace coming from whether it's a regular, whatever, an animal, a paranormal situation, or something. Not that I'm scared, man. I heard somebody walking around on my second floor when I know nobody's there, and it'll wig you out. And then there's other people that will tell you, yeah, I heard this or I saw this, but I get this feeling of dread. Like I know that whatever is there doesn't wish me well. And I don't know, because let's face it, if you're going down the road of paranormal and it's a ghost which doesn't have supposedly a human body, what is it going to do to you? Or how's it going to do to you? People don't want to find out because they feel it like, I know that this, whatever it is, wishes me ill. Not indifferent, doesn't like me, wishes me ill. And you'll get that a lot from people in paranormal situations where that's the make or break why you will have people just like step away from sometimes things that they love to do. All right. Because they never, and by the way, it doesn't always have to be like a ghost or paranormal. It could be the same thing, a UFO, an extraterrestrial sighting, something that even I've heard of people even having that missing time moment where, how's this, that on a soul level, they tremble because they know either they've been a part or been drawn into a situation like that. This is not the norm for a human being made of flesh and blood. And yet some people say, well, that must be so neat. You know what? That primitive brain of ours, it's there to make sure we survive. Yeah, I know there's a lot of people walking around sometimes with this, but that's the purpose of it. Survive. Recognize a threat and survive. Some figure out how you're going to survive, but and human beings usually are very good at picking up the degree of, and I mean, you'll even have, I've spoken to clients who have, if you look at the scale of the phenomena that was happening in the house, it's very low key, very low key. Nothing like that you could say, wow, incredible. But, and there's always a but in there somewhere, they will tell you, I feel that whatever is here is bad. And we're not going with the demonic. I'm not going demonic here. I'm not. Let's no. I don't overuse that word like some people in the paranormal do. But they'll tell you, I feel like that whatever is here is bad. I don't know what it is. I'm not sure what it is. But and then you'll have people will say, you know, let's say if I go down into my basement or I go into the second floor, if I go into that bathroom or that closet or in the backyard somewhere under the whatever, there's just something there that like, and I've heard clients have used this word with me independently, one or the other. Not the, I'm scared of it. Yeah, that goes without saying. They say, I feel repulsed by what it is. Okay, like antimatter, like they're repulsed, like something on a very low soul level is like, you need to get away from this or whatever it is. It will, how can I say this? Hurt. I mean, everybody, when you think of hurt, that's a very general word, but in other words, you know that it presents a threat to you in some way, shape, or form. And this is sometimes about people really knowing the actual origin of what is it, okay? Or why do I feel this way? Because then you'll have people say, well, you know what? I'm going to clarify this. Some people will have told me, you know what? I went and I found out what's the history of the place where I lived at or the land or whatever you want to call it, depending on where they're at. And they'll say, well, you know, I heard that there might have been some type of either a battlefield close by or something, one of those deals. You know, a bunch of people died from the yellow fever. I don't care. Not the same thing. You'll have these people who feel like, oh, you know, like I feel like you go to a certain area and they say, well, I feel like a lot of sadness or grief, or sometimes even to the point of like the physical drain. Not the same thing of when they feel the menace of some coming from something. And so far, my experience, 99.9% of the time, that experience or that feeling that they're getting is coming from an intelligent haunting of something. It's not a residual thing. That's my point. It's not like, yeah, once upon a time, you know, that area under that big tree back there that, you know, people would have to pay you to go back there. It's not because once upon a time there was a battlefield close by or nah. Oh, there's a cemetery. No, that's not a given. That's not that can be. There's something there active, and what's the word I'm looking for? Something that's present in the sense of this is not a residual, and intelligent and that is, how's this, is much more even aware of you than you might be of it. Because you will have phenomena of paranormal where they'll say, you know what, I see this, let's go with you. I'll see the servant girl and she's dressed in these old time, whatever, maid uniform, and you could tell she's doing her thing. In other words, the haunting, even if it's an intelligent haunting, it's not a residual. This ghost is unaware of you. They're doing their whatever they were doing in life. This is what they used to do every day, and they'll go through doors that aren't there. They'll go, places, go through a wall, whatever. No, I'm not talking about. This is about something that is very aware of you. They're in this time zone. They're not living what it was here 50 years ago. Now, the origins of it, that's where it can get really creepy. That question has a lot of answers. But again, you'll have people that one-time experience, like what they've talked to him about, is like all they ever know. Because I'm telling you that at some level, and everybody, it's, you know what, I have to laugh because a lot of people will hear these stories and they'll say, wow, I wish I could have a blank, blank, blank experience, whatever, ghost, UFO, Bigfoot, whatever, until they have it. And then it's like, who told me I wanted to? So I'm telling you, no matter how many books you read or how many stories you read, how many movies or shows, blah, that you see or hear, whatever, it changes when you're the one in the hot seat, when you are the one that's getting the full Monty of whatever it is. Changes. Some people take it in stride, others don't. Others pretend they're taking it in stride. But a good portion of people wish, like, man, I wish I hadn't seen that. I wish I hadn't heard that. Who told me I wanted to know about this? What was I thinking of? That ignorance is bliss thing holds true for a lot of people. Anyway, guys, please don't forget to sign up for my Substack newsletter. You can go to mppellicer.com. You can also go to miamighostchronicles.com. You can have links to everything there. All my podcasts on Spreakers, you can find them there. Whether it's Stories of the Supernatural, Nightshade Diary, Supernatural Storytime, and also Eerie News. All that stuff is there. There's links all over the place. So again, I have a lot of wonderful guests coming in. And I want to thank you for being part of my audience and spending this time with me each and every week. So till next time, take care.